no children. You said she was nothing.
Wait, honey, listen to me. I can explain.
Don't let us interrupt, Daniel. After all, you sent the invitation. You wanted me to see everything I lost, remember?
The woman standing quietly at the entrance wasn't there to ruin his wedding. She was there because years earlier he had destroyed her life. But to understand why the richest man in the room suddenly looked like the poorest soul alive, we have to go back to the days when all he owned was a dream, and the woman who believed in it more than he did. If you love emotional stories where karma always finds its way back, subscribe now and stay until the end, because this wedding is about to turn into the biggest public humiliation of his life. Now, let me show you how it all began. Her name was Amara. She wasn't born into wealth. She wasn't raised in luxury. She grew up in a modest neighborhood where people measured riches by the love inside a home instead of the money inside a bank account. From a young age, she learned that real love wasn't just spoken, it was proven through sacrifice. If you loved someone, you stood beside them when life became difficult. You carried them when they were too weak to walk. That belief would one day become both her greatest strength and her greatest tragedy. Then she met Daniel. He was brilliant, charming, and full of impossible dreams. He had no wealthy parents, no powerful connections, no inheritance waiting for him. All he possessed was an old laptop, countless business ideas, and a determination so fierce it made people either admire him or laugh at him. Most people laughed. They called him unrealistic. They said dreams didn't pay rent. They told Amara she was wasting the best years of her life on a man who had nothing. But when Daniel looked into her eyes and whispered, "One day, I'll give you the life you deserve," she believed every single word. Not because he was already successful, but because she believed in the man behind the promise. Against everyone's advice, they got married. There were no grand ballrooms, no famous musicians, no designer gowns. Just a tiny church, a handful of family members, borrowed decorations, and two young people convinced that love could survive anything. Reality didn't take long to test that belief. Their apartment was barely large enough for two people. Rain leaked through the roof during storms. Sometimes the electricity disappeared for days because they couldn't pay the bills. The refrigerator often held more empty shelves than food. Every month, the landlord knocked on the door with less patience than the month before. Still, every morning Daniel left the apartment carrying hope. He chased investors, attended meetings that led nowhere, pitched ideas to people who barely listened before rejecting him. He returned home exhausted, but never defeated. And every evening, Amara welcomed him with the same warm smile, even when she herself was falling apart. She became the foundation beneath his dream. Before sunrise, she worked at a supermarket stacking shelves and serving impatient customers. In the evenings, she tutored neighborhood children until her voice grew hoarse. On weekends, she joined catering teams, carrying heavy trays at weddings where strangers celebrated lives she could barely imagine. She slept only a few hours each night. Sometimes she skipped meals so Daniel could eat. When money became impossible, she quietly began selling the pieces of her own life. First, her earrings, then the bracelet her late grandmother had given her, then every wedding gift they had received. Finally, she stood in front of a jewelry buyer holding the necklace her mother had worn for decades before placing it around her daughter's neck on her wedding day. The buyer quoted a price. Amara closed her eyes for just a second. Then she nodded. She walked away without looking back. It was family. It was memory. It was love. And she exchanged all of it for one more chance to keep Daniel's dream alive. She never told him what she had sacrificed. She simply smiled whenever he asked where the money came from. Years passed. Then everything changed. One investor finally said yes. One opportunity became 10. One successful contract became hundreds. Daniel's company exploded almost overnight. The same people who had mocked him suddenly wanted meetings. Newspapers called him a visionary. Television stations invited him for interviews. Luxury cars replaced crowded buses. Tailored suits replaced faded shirts. The tiny apartment gave way to a mansion with gates taller than the building they once lived in. Success didn't simply change Daniel's lifestyle, it changed his heart. The wealthy friends who surrounded him smiled politely at Amara's face, but mocked her the moment she walked away. They called her provincial, too ordinary, too quiet, too unsophisticated. She doesn't belong in our world, they whispered. For the first time in years, Amara allowed herself to breathe. She stood on the balcony of their beautiful new home, looked at the city lights below, and whispered to herself, "We made it." She truly believed their years of suffering had finally ended. She couldn't have been more wrong. Success didn't simply change Daniel's lifestyle, it changed his heart. The wealthy friends who surrounded him smiled politely at Amara's face, but mocked her the moment she walked away. They called her provincial, too ordinary, too quiet, too unsophisticated. She doesn't belong in our world, they whispered. At first, Daniel defended her. Then he stopped defending her. Eventually, he started agreeing with them. He stopped inviting her to important events. He told her her dresses looked cheap. He corrected the way she spoke. He criticized her table manners. He laughed whenever she asked innocent questions about the wealthy circles he now belonged to. Little by little, the woman who had built his future became someone he was ashamed to stand beside. The painful part wasn't that strangers judged her. It was that the man whose life she had saved began seeing her through their eyes. Still, Amara refused to give up. She believed every marriage faced difficult seasons. She kept hoping the man she had fallen in love with was still somewhere beneath the expensive suits and luxury watches. Then one morning, life gave her news she thought would heal everything. She was pregnant, not with one baby, with twins. Her hands trembled as she stared at the test results. Tears rolled down her cheeks. She imagined Daniel lifting her into the air with joy. She imagined decorating a nursery together. She imagined tiny footsteps filling their silent mansion with laughter. Certain this miracle would bring back the husband she had lost, she rushed home with the happiest heart she'd carried in years. Instead of flowers, instead of celebration, instead of love, Daniel slid a folder across the table. Divorce papers. The world seemed to stop spinning. With shaking hands, Amara reached into her bag and placed the pregnancy test in front of him. "I wanted this to be a surprise," she whispered. For one brief second, she waited for his face to soften. It never did. Daniel laughed. Not from happiness, from cruelty. He accused her of getting pregnant to trap him now that he was rich. He claimed she had planned everything to secure his fortune. Then, without an ounce of shame, he revealed the truth. He was leaving her for another woman, the glamorous daughter of a billionaire, a woman who, according to him, actually belonged beside a man of his status. The words struck harder than any slap ever could. Then he ordered security to remove the woman who had once sacrificed everything for him. Amara walked out of the mansion carrying no suitcase, no money, no dignity left to protect. Only two tiny heartbeats growing inside her. The children their father had already rejected before they were even born. But fate has a way of remembering every sacrifice and every betrayal. The question is, when the truth finally catches up with Daniel, will all the money in the world be enough to save him? The cold rain soaked through Amara's clothes long before the tears stopped falling. One suitcase, one folder containing divorce papers, one tiny pregnancy test still clutched tightly in her trembling hand. That was all she had left after giving everything to the man who had promised to love her forever. She stood outside the towering mansion she had once called home, watching the massive iron gates close in front of her. The sound echoed through the empty street like the final chapter of a life she no longer recognized. Behind those gates were the dreams she had built. Ahead of her was nothing but uncertainty. For the first time since she met Daniel, Amara had nowhere to go. No parents waiting with open arms. No relatives wealthy enough to rescue her. No close friends who even knew what had happened. The woman who had sacrificed everything for her husband had become homeless in a single afternoon. She wandered the streets until exhaustion forced her to sit on a lonely bus stop bench. The city moved around her as if she didn't exist. Cars rushed past. Couples laughed together. Street vendors shouted for customers. Life continued. Only hers had stopped. She lowered her head into her hands. Maybe everyone had been right. Maybe love really did make people foolish. Maybe sacrificing everything for another person was nothing more than a beautiful lie. Dark thoughts crept quietly into her mind. She imagined simply disappearing, ending the unbearable pain before it swallowed what little remained of her. Then, almost instinctively, her hand rested on her stomach. 2 tiny lives. 2 innocent hearts beating beneath her own. They had done nothing wrong. They hadn't asked to be brought into a broken world. Yet they depended entirely on her. At that very moment, Amara made a promise that would define the rest of her life. If the whole world rejects us, I won't. Those words became the foundation she would stand on whenever life tried to knock her down again. But promises are easy to make. Keeping them is another story. The months that followed tested her in ways no human heart should ever endure. Finding work while visibly pregnant proved almost impossible. Interview after interview ended the same way. We'll call you. They never did. Some employers smiled politely before choosing someone else. Others didn't even bother hiding their judgment. One manager looked directly at her growing stomach and sighed. We need someone reliable. The words cut deeper than he could ever imagine. Reliable? She had worked 3 jobs to build another person's future. She had sold every valuable thing she owned without complaining. She had remained loyal when poverty chased everyone else away. And now, she was considered unreliable simply because she was carrying life. Eventually, she found temporary cleaning jobs that paid barely enough to survive. She scrubbed office floors after business executives had gone home. She washed restaurant kitchens late into the night. Some mornings, she woke with swollen feet so painful she could barely stand. Still, she kept working, because every kick from the babies reminded her why she couldn't afford to stop. Then, the day arrived, earlier than expected. A sharp pain tore through her body while she was cleaning the floor of a small grocery store. The mop slipped from her hands. Another contraction, then another. The store owner rushed her to a government hospital where overcrowded hallways echoed with crying babies and anxious families. Everyone seemed to have someone holding their hand. Everyone, except Amara. No husband, no mother, no father. No one. She faced hours of unimaginable pain with nothing but silent prayers and stubborn determination. When the first baby's cry finally filled the room, tears streamed down her face. A little boy, healthy, strong. Moments later came another cry. A little girl, just as healthy. The nurse placed both babies gently into her arms. For several seconds, the world became completely silent. All the betrayal, all the humiliation, all the heartbreak. It disappeared beneath the weight of 2 tiny miracles staring back at her. She kissed each forehead softly. My precious children, you will never spend a single day wondering whether you're loved. Outside that hospital room, the world still felt cruel. Inside it, a new purpose had been born. She named her son Ethan. Her daughter became Emma. From that day forward, every decision she made belonged to the 3 of them. The years that followed weren't measured by birthdays or holidays. They were measured by sacrifices, sleepless nights comforting sick children while reporting to work before sunrise, skipping meals so the twins could drink milk, walking long distances because transportation cost too much, borrowing library books instead of buying toys, mending torn uniforms by hand because replacing them wasn't an option. There were nights when Amara cried herself to sleep after the twins had fallen asleep beside her. Not because she regretted becoming their mother, but because she feared she would never be enough. Yet every morning, Ethan and Emma erased those fears without realizing it. Tiny arms wrapped around her neck, messy kisses on her cheeks, childish laughter filling their modest apartment. Whenever people asked where their father was, the twins looked toward their mother. Amara never poisoned their hearts, never filled them with bitterness, never taught them hatred. Instead, she simply smiled and answered with quiet dignity. Sometimes adults make choices. That was all. No insults, no revenge, just truth. But while Amara fought invisible battles every single day, the man who had abandoned them was living a life that looked perfect from the outside. Daniel's business empire continued growing beyond anyone's expectations. Every month seemed to bring another award, another luxury acquisition, another magazine cover. Beside him, his glamorous fiancée dazzled cameras with designer gowns, expensive jewelry, and flawless smiles. The media adored them. They became the country's favorite power couple. Business magazines praised Daniel's vision. Lifestyle magazines praised their romance. Social media overflowed with comments, calling them couple goals. People envied the fairy tale. No one knew the fairy tale had been built upon another woman's heartbreak. Not once, not a single time, did Daniel wonder whether Amara had survived. Not once did he ask whether his unborn children had been born safely. As far as he was concerned, they no longer existed. But karma has an unusual habit. It waits patiently. Years passed before destiny quietly opened a door neither of them saw coming. It began on an ordinary afternoon. Amara had taken Ethan and Emma to a community business workshop hosted by a local entrepreneur. The twins sat in the back, drawing pictures while their mother listened intently, scribbling notes on every page she could find. The speaker noticed her. Not because of expensive clothes, not because of wealth, but because every question she asked revealed a sharp business mind hidden beneath years of survival. After the event, he approached her. "You've built budgets, haven't you?" She smiled faintly. "I've built a life from almost nothing." He laughed softly, then handed her his business card. "I think you're thinking too small." Those words stayed with her for weeks. Thinking too small? She had spent years believing survival was enough. But what if survival wasn't the finish line? What if everything she had learned through suffering could become the foundation for something much bigger? Every sleepless night had taught discipline. Every unpaid bill had taught financial wisdom. Every rejection had taught resilience. Every betrayal had taught discernment. Perhaps the woman who had spent years building another person's empire was finally ready to build one of her own. What Amara didn't know was that the first step she was about to take would eventually shake the very business world that had once celebrated Daniel and set them on a collision course neither of them could escape. But before fate reunited them, one question still remained. When success finally knocks on the door of a woman who has known nothing but pain, will it heal her heart, or will it tempt her to become the very person who once destroyed hers? Amara stood outside the small workshop long after everyone else had gone home, staring at the business card resting in her palm. It was nothing more than a piece of paper, yet somehow it felt heavier than every burden she had carried over the past several years. For the first time since Daniel had thrown her out, someone had looked at her and seen more than a struggling single mother. They had seen potential. That single moment changed everything. She refused to waste another day believing her story had ended with betrayal. Every night, after putting Ethan and Emma to bed, she studied marketing, finance, leadership, supply chains, customer service. She borrowed books from libraries, watched free business seminars, and filled notebook after notebook with ideas. While others slept, Amara quietly prepared for a future no one else could see. Then she took the greatest risk of her life. With every naira she had managed to save, she started a tiny business from a rented storefront, no bigger than a bedroom. People laughed. Some said a single mother with no connections couldn't compete against established companies. Others predicted she would close within 6 months. Amara ignored every voice except the 2 little ones waiting for her at home. She greeted every customer with kindness. She remembered names. She solved problems instead of making excuses. If a client wasn't satisfied, she stayed until they were. Slowly, 1 customer became 5. 5 became 50. 50 became hundreds. Her reputation spread, not because she had the biggest company, but because she had become the most trusted. And trust is a currency that never loses its value. Years of hardship had taught her something. Daniel had forgotten the moment success found him. People never forget how you make them feel. As the business expanded, she hired people others refused to employ. Single mothers, young graduates with no experience, widows trying to rebuild their lives, men and women who simply needed someone to believe in them. Whenever her managers questioned these decisions, Amara answered with the same quiet conviction. Someone once believed in me when I had nothing. Now it's my turn. Her employees didn't just work for her. They fought for her vision. The company grew faster than anyone expected. Soon, that tiny rented shop became a modern office. The modern office became multiple branches. The multiple branches became a nationally recognized brand. Business magazines suddenly wanted interviews. Television stations requested exclusive features. Industry experts called her one of the brightest entrepreneurs of her generation. People praised her intelligence, her resilience, her leadership. But none of them knew that every achievement had been built upon years of silent tears shed after 2 children had fallen asleep. While the headlines celebrated her success, the greatest victory was happening at home. Ethan and Emma were growing into remarkable children. They inherited their mother's kindness before they inherited her determination. Ethan was thoughtful beyond his years. If he noticed another child eating alone at school, he would quietly sit beside them. Emma possessed a fearless heart. Whenever she saw someone being bullied, she stepped between them without hesitation, even when she was afraid herself. They were bright, respectful, curious, and fiercely protective of the woman who had raised them. One evening, after Amara returned home exhausted from work, she found dinner already waiting on the table. The twins, still too young to cook properly, had managed to prepare something that barely resembled a meal. Burnt toast, overcooked eggs, tea with far too much sugar. "We wanted you to rest today," Emma said shyly. Amara laughed through tears as she hugged them tightly. In that moment, she realized something extraordinary. She hadn't just survived. She had raised 2 beautiful souls. Occasionally, the question of their father surfaced. Mostly after school events, where classmates arrived holding both parents' hands. One afternoon, Ethan finally asked the question Amara had known would come. "Mom, did Dad stop loving us?" The room became painfully quiet. One answer could fill their hearts with bitterness forever. Another could teach them grace. She knelt in front of both children and gently held their hands. "Your father made a choice long before either of you were born." Emma lowered her eyes. "So, he didn't want us?" Amara immediately shook her head. "No." She lifted their chins until they looked into her eyes. "Never confuse someone else's choice with your worth." Those words settled deeply into their hearts. She never lied. She never insulted Daniel. She simply refused to allow his decisions to define her children's identity. And perhaps that was her greatest victory. Years continued to pass. Success surrounded Amara from every direction. Luxury homes replaced cramped apartments. Professional drivers replaced long walks. Her schedule filled with board meetings, charity galas, and international conferences. Yet every employee noticed the same remarkable thing. Nothing about her heart had changed. She still remembered the names of the cleaners. She still ate lunch with junior staff. She still visited struggling families through her charity foundation without inviting television cameras. Whenever journalists asked the secret behind her success, she smiled gently. The people who suffer the most often understand the value of compassion better than anyone else. Across the city, another empire stood just as tall. Daniel had become even wealthier. His company dominated headlines. His upcoming wedding to the billionaire's daughter was being described as the social event of the decade. Luxury hotels competed to host it. Fashion designers fought to create the bridal gown. Politicians, celebrities, business moguls. Everyone wanted an invitation. Daniel loved every second of the attention. He had everything he once dreamed about: money, power, influence, respect. At least, that's what everyone believed. One afternoon, during a casual conversation with old business associates, someone mentioned a name he hadn't heard in years. "Have you met Amara Okafor?" Daniel barely looked up. "No." "You should. She's incredible. One of the fastest rising CEOs in the country." Daniel frowned. "It can't be the same, Amara." "It is." The room fell silent. For a brief moment, something unfamiliar crossed Daniel's face: curiosity. Then it disappeared beneath arrogance. He laughed dismissively. "I'm sure she's doing fine." Inside, he convinced himself it was impossible. The woman he had abandoned couldn't possibly have built anything significant. She was probably running a small shop somewhere. Maybe she'd gotten lucky. Nothing more. His pride refused to believe otherwise. Then another thought entered his mind. A cruel one. His wedding was only weeks away. What better way to remind himself he had made the right decision than to parade his perfect life in front of the woman he'd left behind? He didn't want reconciliation. He wanted validation. He instructed his assistant to locate Amara and personally deliver an invitation, not because he respected her, because he wanted her to witness everything she had lost. He imagined her arriving alone, wearing an inexpensive dress. Watching him marry into one of the richest families in the country, he imagined the pity in everyone else's eyes. It would be the final proof that leaving her had been the smartest decision of his life. When the invitation arrived at Amara's office, her assistant looked horrified. "Ma'am, surely you're not considering this?" Amara accepted the elegant envelope without changing her expression. She opened it slowly, read every word, closed it again, then placed it calmly on her desk. The room waited for her reaction. There was no anger, no tears, no bitterness, only peace. Her assistant finally asked, "Are you going to ignore it?" 8. Amara looked out through the glass windows of her office at the city skyline she had helped shape. Then she smiled. A quiet, unshakable smile. "No," the assistant blinked in surprise. "You're actually going?" "Yes, but after everything he did." Amara interrupted gently. "I have nothing left to fear." She wasn't going for revenge. She wasn't going to expose him. She wasn't hoping to embarrass anyone. She simply refused to spend the rest of her life running from a chapter that had already ended. She folded the invitation carefully and slipped it back into its envelope. At that exact moment, Ethan and Emma walked into her office after school. Emma noticed the gold envelope immediately. "Mom, what's that?" Amara looked at her children, the two miracles who had carried her through the darkest years of her life. Then she answered softly, "An invitation." Neither child realized that accepting it would lead them straight into the moment destiny had been preparing for since the day they were born. A moment where hidden truths would walk into the light, where lies carefully protected for years would collapse in seconds, and where one innocent word from two children would bring the most extravagant wedding in the city to a complete standstill. The wedding everyone had called the event of the decade unfolded exactly as people had imagined. Crystal chandeliers bathed the ballroom in golden light. Fresh flowers lined every aisle. Luxury cars filled the parking lot. Politicians mingled with celebrities. Billionaires laughed with business executives. Every detail reflected unimaginable wealth. But beneath all the elegance, another conversation quietly spread from table to table. Did you hear? His ex-wife is coming? I heard she's been struggling ever since he left her. Why would she even show up? Maybe she's hoping he'll take her back. The whispers grew louder. Some expected tears. Others expected a dramatic confrontation. A few secretly hoped for public humiliation. No one realized destiny had prepared something none of them could imagine. Then, just as the officiant announced that the ceremony would begin in a few moments, a deep engine roar echoed outside the venue. Every head turned. A sleek black Lamborghini rolled slowly through the entrance and stopped directly in front of the red carpet. The driver stepped out first. He walked calmly to the rear door and opened it with quiet respect. Elegant heels touched the ground. Amara stepped out. The room fell silent. She wore no extravagant jewelry screaming for attention, no forced smile, no expression of revenge. Only quiet confidence. The kind that could never be purchased. She looked like a woman who had survived the worst storm of her life and discovered peace on the other side. Then another door opened. A little boy stepped out. Then a little girl, perfectly dressed. Each gently held one of Amara's hands as they walked toward the entrance together. Guests stared, confused. Who were these children? And why did something about them feel strangely familiar? Inside the ballroom, Daniel looked toward the entrance, expecting to see the broken woman he had abandoned years ago. Instead, his heartbeat stopped. Amara walked in with a grace that made every whisper disappear. She wasn't broken. She wasn't bitter. She had become everything he once believed she never could. Then it happened. The little boy looked directly at Daniel. His innocent face suddenly brightened with recognition. "Daddy." His sister smiled just as warmly. "Daddy." Silence. The music stopped. Even the photographers lowered their cameras. Daniel's bride slowly turned toward him, confusion replacing the smile on her face. Daniel couldn't breathe. His eyes remained fixed on the twins. The longer he stared, the harder it became to deny the truth. The little boy had his eyes. The little girl carried his unmistakable smile. Even the tiny dimples that had appeared in every childhood photograph of Daniel now rested on both children's faces. It felt as though he was looking into mirrors, reflecting the life he had abandoned before it even began. The question that echoed through the room wasn't spoken aloud. It lived inside every shocked face. How could a man reject children who looked so unmistakably like him? The whispers returned, louder than before. His bride stepped backward. "You told me there were no children." Daniel opened his mouth. Nothing came out. His parents looked at him with disbelief. Business partners exchanged uncomfortable glances. Some guests quietly reached for their phones. Years spent building the image of a respected businessman began collapsing in seconds. One lie had uncovered another. The glamorous ceremony dissolved into confusion. His bride slowly removed her engagement ring. Tears filled her eyes, not because she had lost a wedding, but because she realized she had never truly known the man she was about to marry. Without another word, she turned and walked away. Her family followed. Guests began leaving. The officiant quietly closed his book. Within minutes, the wedding everyone had celebrated became the scandal everyone would remember. Daniel finally moved. He pushed through the crowd and ran outside. "Amara?" She stopped walking, but didn't turn around immediately. When she finally faced him, there was no anger in her eyes, only peace. Daniel's voice trembled. "I'm sorry." The words sounded painfully small. He fell to his knees. "I was blind. I was arrogant. Please, let me make this right." Tears streamed down his face. "I want to know my children." He looked toward Ethan and Emma. "I'll be the father they deserve. I swear I'll change." For the first time in his life, the powerful businessman who had controlled boardrooms and negotiated billion-dollar deals realized there was something money could never buy back. Lost time. Amara looked at him for a long moment. Then she smiled. It wasn't the smile of victory, nor the smile of revenge. It was the smile of someone who had already healed. She spoke softly. I didn't come here to ruin your wedding. Daniel lowered his head. She continued, I came because you invited me. Those simple words carried more weight than any accusation ever could. She gently reached for Ethan's hand, then Emma's. Together, the three of them turned and walked toward the waiting Lamborghini. Not once did Amara look back. The children followed without hesitation. The car door closed. Moments later, the Lamborghini disappeared beyond the gates. Daniel remained standing alone in the silence, watching the family he had abandoned disappear into the distance forever. Not because they had rejected him, but because years earlier he had rejected them first. And in that heartbreaking moment, the richest man in the city finally understood that the greatest treasures in life are never measured by wealth, but by the people who choose to love us when we have nothing. So, let me ask you this. If you were Amara, would you have given Daniel a second chance? Or do some choices deserve to become permanent consequences? If this story touched your heart, share your answer in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more unforgettable karma stories that remind us every choice has a consequence.